There are a few things to bear in mind when kicking off a new project and establishing a CDE for the new project. In fact, there are altogether 13 items. Let's look at them one by at a time, starting with item 1. Where do you want to go? Or to put the questions in plain language. First, consider whether the CDE is to be used only for one single project or a program of projects or across the whole company. If this is part of a bigger transformation project, more investment may be needed. For the client of the project, they should ideally start by thinking at a strategic level about what questions is needed to run their company and to generate some plain language questions. Plain language question means that key questions should be asked from the project team in simple, straightforward, non-technical language. For example, you can ask the questions under 3 separate categories, which are the operational information requirements, OIR, asset information requirements, AIR, or project information requirements, PIR. And this we have covered in quite a bit of detail in the previous lectures. Now, under the OIR, basically you are looking at what kind of information is needed to run the business most efficiently. For example, this might include information that is needed to produce monthly performance report or information to make planned investment decision. AIR, basically they are asking what information about the assets are needed to inform the operational information requirements. For example, information may be needed about the scheduled maintenance and historical cost maintenance, or information to do with risk assessment and control measures. This information will form part of the asset information model. PIR. The project information requirements sets out what information are needed from the suppliers to deliver from each project, in what format and when, to be able to supply the assets and the operational information requirements. This information will be contained within the PIM, Project Information Model. The project information requirements should be set out at the beginning of any project in a document called the Exchange Information Requirements, or EIR. Secondly, we need to ask, what are the project's requirements? Consider what information is to be required, when, and in what format. Ideally, there should be a document called the EIR setting out clearly what information is required and in what format and at what project stages. The diagram shown is extracted from the ISO 19650 Part 1 standard, and it illustrates the process life cycle within the CDE. It basically shows the definition or defining of the information requirements prior to issuing any tender or procurement documents, reviewing the capabilities of potential suppliers to be able to meet these requirements before the contracts are awarded. The suppliers then prepare a detailed submission setting out how they will deliver the information managed by the lead appointed party. Only then does the project progress through the typical project delivery stages. At the end of each project stage, the team should be issued with information in accordance with the original requirements. Only then, or only these are checked off as satisfactory, can the project progress to the next stage. As the diagram also illustrates, the volume of project information continues to increase smoothly without losing data at each project stage. And there is a transition from the information required for the design and construction through to information needed to operate the completed project. It is also important for setting out the information requirements pertaining to security. Best practice is to follow the requirements set out in the ISO 27001. This relates to information requirements for security-sensitive assets and should also be considered at the start of the project. The third question to ask is, what is the team responsible for? Some questions in relation to responsibilities are you the only responsible for managing your own information, or will you be managing a project CDE? Who is going to be the information manager? There will generally be an information manager for the project, usually on the contractor or the lead designer's team. But ideally, each discipline or task team should have their own information manager, depending on the size of the project, of course. We should also establish the project conventions, the standards, the methods, and procedures early. Everyone should be working to the same project standards. Establishing this early on will make things much easier further down the line. This includes items such as file naming conventions and what file metadata is to be collected, and to enable search to be made more easily. What type of file types and software versions is the project team going to use? It is generally best to use open standards for information exchanges. We will need to implement an information workflow or sign-off process. For project outset, the workflow processes should be established. For example, what approval protocol must be followed? Who has the check and approval authority? Do you need a separate project or team spaces? Particularly for different teams within large projects or for particularly sensitive information, there may be a need to create separate spaces within the common data environment. We will also need to know what we have already in terms of our people and processes. The project team should map out their current processes, understand how they currently manage their information, including manual or paper-based processes. Some questions to ask include, what are the current pain points? What technology software platforms do we already have? What skills do we already have? This will help identify gaps as well as opportunities for exploiting what we already have. Can our existing technology solution be further exploited or adapted to suit the new project requirements, for example? We may also want to consider a phased rollout, focusing on identified CDE champions or pilot projects to allow time to embed new technologies and the way of working within the project team. Another important question to ask is, do you want to do everything in-house? When the project team has determined their current level of skills and technical resources, they should then be able to decide whether they need to seek external help. There are many external service providers of BIM and CDE support services readily available. It is recommended to consider this in conjunction with the business strategy of the company, and the aim should be to become self-sufficient in the long run. The use of digital processes and CDE-supported workflow is only going to expand over the coming years and has been accelerated by the COVID crisis. If the project teams choose to use an external BIM consultancy, it is recommended to seek training as part of their service so that the project team can learn and take over this sort of in-house work. However, this ultimately comes down to what the business strategy is and what the firm can afford. Other things to think about in this category are who is going to manage the common data environment itself on the project. Should the client or the lead designer or the lead contractor manage it? For client or other parties within the supply chain, they should be aware that there are risks associated with entrusting the management of your information to other parties. How long will you be running the CDE for? Generally, it is recommended keeping a CDE open at least until all the project information has been transferred onto the end of the client's asset management system, or for at least 1 year after the project is completed. We will also need to consider the need for continuous review. It is good practice to establish a continuous review process to ensure that the team members are fulfilling their obligations in terms of submitting information in the correct format and when required, and to be able to take mitigating measures, or make improvement as soon as possible. Cost is an important consideration. The cost of any new CDE solutions will involve additional costs over and above the cost of the software licensing itself, such as additional consultancy, training, data hosting, data migration that may be required. Security is also critical. If the project is for a public body, it may be needed to consider issues related to data sovereignty, as well as cybersecurity. The recommendations for data security are set out in the ISO 27001 and the ISO 19650 Part 5. Lastly, data ownership. BIM protocol is a legal agreement that can be incorporated into professional service contract, which sets out aspects including ownership of licenses of models and data, and provision of CDE hosting services, including requirements to provide continuing access.